Alright guys, Ian here from 79 Sports Therapy. So today we're going to talk about process versus outcome. And I know what you're thinking, like it's just goal setting, right? Process versus outcome is way more than that. So let's get into it. Okay, so process versus outcome. What do we even mean by that? And look, it definitely takes a lot of its influence from our goal setting. So having those sort of short-term goals, that's our process. Medium-term goals to an extent is still process, and then outcome obviously being your long-term goal. And look, it's our way of sort of thinking about how do we stay more present in terms of what we're doing, rather than getting lost in that, where we want to kind of go to. And I think that that's actually a really important component of what we think of when we think about rehab, right? Because ultimately with all of our patients, we're trying to get them back to a sort of end goal, a sort of finish line. And that might be return back into competition. That might be getting back into the gym. That might be running a marathon. That might be walking up and down some stairs. That might be, pouring a cup of tea. Whatever that end goal is, I think it's kind of quite easy for patients to get very lost in that and not understand the steps required to get to that. And again, as I say, this is where we look at our goal setting. So those short-term goals, they can be sort of diluted down into the absolute minutiae. So, the sort of next rep protocol, or just into where we're going to hit at the end of this week, at the end of, sort of next week. That's where we then start to then actually find solace in that process, and actually be able to kind of see, right, this step means that step, rather than just getting stuck in that bigger term sort of picture. And I guess this kind of all came about because, like, I was speaking to a patient the other day, and he's a sort of typical sort of lower back pain sort of patient, a little bit sort of multifactorial, but not hugely sort of complex, and actually was doing really, really well. Had just a spout of almost sort of cognitive dissonance where he kind of thought, oh, do you know what, it's going pretty well, slacked off on some of the things that sort of made that improvement, and had a sort of rebound of pain. And we were sort of talking about him again, where he was sort of mentally about it, and he was a little bit kind of stuck on, actually, I can't really see that light at the end of the tunnel. And we kind of said, actually, do you know what, like, the most important thing for him is to focus on the process, focus on, okay, what's my next rep, and what does that next rep mean as regards, those sort of shorter term goals. So where am I at when I would see him next in the clinic, week, 2 weeks later, where are we at when we're there? Can we do 5 or 6 more things that we weren't able to do, that sort of thing. And I think, like, during this sort of discussion, it became kind of quite clear that he was stuck in his outcome measures. So when he was able to get back into doing exercise, when he was able to get back into, leading a sort of really sort of active life, without being present in what he actually needed to do. So this is where that thought process of the sort of process versus the outcome, and rather than sort of getting stuck into the absolute details of short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term goals, actually thinking a little bit more about, right, what is the most important thing for him to do right now, that being the process, and what does that mean as regards the next step of the process. And the next step of the process may well be like his next rep of exercises, the next day's worth of exercises, rather than getting stuck into, but I'm so far away from kind of where I want to be. And I kind of thought about this as being, again, part of how we look at longer term rehab. So if we take an ACL reconstruction, for instance, we're talking about a 9 to 12 month rehab process. And, with that, if we're just stuck on where that end goal is, it's really hard for that patient to process that. And that's why we put in these sort of check marks, sort of day by day, week by week, as regards, right, we're going to hit this, we're going to hit this, we're going to hit this. And we can see that process building up. Now, the issue kind of comes where we don't have a sort of acute, sort of traumatic injury like an ACL. So in terms of this patient with the sort of lower back pain, it's really hard to kind of put those markers in, so to kind of say, this is what that process looks like for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, as we would do if we've got an ACL reconstruction rehab plan, right? So that again is that sort of understanding that process, and that process being kind of quite a flexible unit. So that ability to kind of say, okay, the next rep is the most important, or actually this goal that we're going to hit at the end of this week, this is the most important. And it allows us to understand that people's lives aren't very linear, that there is a flexibility required during people's days, and again has an overarching kind of process, an overarching kind of theme. I think obviously sort of within that, it's really important to not lose sight of where that end goal is. So where the outcome measure is. So what do we want them to move back towards? And I think, that's in particular important for, athletes, people who exercise a lot, because we've got to think about that end goal, that outcome measure as being, return back into exercise. So we kind of have to tailor some of their short-term goals and the process, to achieve that that specific outcome measure, for instance. So, if we were to take like a golfer and a motocross rider, right? The way in which we'd rehab those two guys, it might be the sort of same injury, but there would be a degree of sort of difference within that. So not losing sight of that outcome measure, I think is really, really important, but it's always based in what that process is, and that's the thing that's really baked in. That's the thing that allows us to then progress step by step by step to get to that outcome measure. And I think sort of beyond that, I think it's actually quite a nice model for describing some of what we do when we look at exercise, right? And again, this is all sort of born out of a discussion I had with another patient where we were looking at her squat technique, and this is a very, very, very mobile patient. So is able to get away with not having great technique with stuff because her mobility gives her an outlet whereby she's able to sort of get to end range without sort of really needing to be absolutely spot on accurate. And again, we sort of applied that sort of same approach, that same process versus outcome. So her outcome being, can she squat down to the floor and come back up again? Well, she can, because she's really, really mobile. Now, her issue was that she's very knee dominant versus very hip dominant. So the way in which it occurred, so the process, that was off. And it meant that she was getting a degree of knee pain, anterior hip pain when she was squatting. And actually then, even though she could go all the way down to the floor and all the way sort of back up again, and as a trainer, you could look at that and sort of say, do you know what, that's good, right? She's hitting end of range, she's coming back up again. I don't see the issue. Whereas actually, if we take a little bit more of a kind of critical eye on it, you can sort of see and understand that actually the process isn't correct. So even when we look at an exercise, we can break down process versus outcome. So again, being very process-driven versus very outcome-driven allows us to actually think about how we move, think about the technique that we've kind of got going on, and that then driving the outcome measure. So you can start to see how this process versus outcome model is actually a really, really good model to have just floating around in your head with everything that we're doing, right? So, if we're prescribing an exercise to somebody, again, what's the outcome? So, with our squat sort of example, the outcome is, can they go all the way down, all the way back up again? What's the process? How they initiate the movement, how the secondary joints, the tertiary joints moves, etc., etc. So focusing down on the process allows us to hit the right outcome. Much the same as then when we're sort of describing or prescribing a sort of rehab plan. Again, what's the outcome? So where do we want them to get back to? So if it's return to play, what sport they're involved in? What's the needs analysis for them? If they just need to walk up and down a flight of stairs, again, what's the needs analysis for that? And then again, it's then process. So what is the process required to break that down? And again, that, for each individual sort of injury may all sort of change. And again, it's that, if you've got an ACL reconstruction, we're conceivably planning for sort of 12 months worth of this, right? So you have to have an understanding of where we need to kind of get to, so the things that need to kind of build up that process and build up the sort of outcome measure, and then the process required to then build that through. And then again, it allows you to then construct your planning. That doesn't necessarily sort of dictate what the minutiae of that planning is, but it definitely allows you to construct, right, these are the sort of medium term goals we want to hit, these are the shorter term goals we want to hit, and then we can then start to then structure sort of from that. It's the same thing we should be having when we're looking at constructing some form of sort of rehab plan, whether that is something that's very, very bespoke and very, very sort of specific by the day, or that's something a little bit more, do this exercise, do that exercise. For sort of almost every sort of injury that we're encountering, right? The reason being is because it allows the patient to sit back in that process. So to sit back in that procedure of I do this, I do this, I do this, and then I get to there. And it allows us to kind of ground the patient in an ideal of actually there is a journey through here. So we're not just saying, okay, we're just going to get back to there. How do we get back to there? Don't know. We're kind of saying, okay, we need to get back here, and to get back there, we do this, we do this, we do this, and it allows the patient to really sit down in that and feel very present in that, and not get stuck with that. Yeah, but I'm so far away from where I need to be. But that's us for this time. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, comment below, let us know your thoughts. See you next time.